Hello viewers and welcome to TV English Language, our special program. Today we are going to talk about the transitional justice which is undertaken here in Ethiopia. For that I met Misganaw Mulugeta, who is Transitional Justice Working Group member. We are going to talk about the concept, the objectives and the goals they are going to achieve on this transitional justice and the green paper as well. First of all, I would like to appreciate for your time, Misganaw, to be here at the TV studio to have an exclusive interview with us. Thank you very much, sir.
Welcome. Thanks for having me.
All right. Today we are going to talk about transitional justice. So, as a transitional justice working group member, I'm going to ask you various questions to give us like highlight for our audiences. From the general outlook, transitional justice aims to provide recognition to victims in international contexts, enhance the trust of individuals in the state institutions, reinforce respect for human rights and promote the rule of law as well, a step towards reconciliation and the prevention of new violations. This is the general outlook of transitional justice from the context of the global context. So how does transitional justice apply in Ethiopia? What does it mean?
Like you mentioned, the transitional justice approaches have different objectives, and as you indicated, it has been tried in many different countries, in many different contexts, and a lot of other countries have went through the process of transitional justice. Now, the most common thing among these countries is the existence of widespread human rights violations, numerous victims through those violations, and numerous perpetrators. So one of the key questions for countries coming out of a situation like this, and we call them countries in transition, is they're transitioning to democratic processes or is they're transitioning to a new political order, have used transitional justice approaches. A lot of people would mention the case of South Africa, for example, post-apartheid South Africa. A lot of people remember Desmond Tutu and that Reconciliation Commission. A lot of people also remember the cases in Rwanda with localized courts persecuting perpetrators. There are a lot of processes that were applicable in many different Latin American countries, South American countries, when they were coming out of a situation like this. So in Ethiopia, the basic assumption is our country is in transition. There has been widespread, numerous human rights violations, some perpetrated by state actors, some perpetrated by non-state actors. We have had widespread conflicts that have resulted in a lot of human rights violation. And in order to transition to, like you said, a country with rule of law, justice, this past must be addressed and must be addressed not only with reconciliation, but also with accountability. So an approach like transitional justice gives you a whole sum of these components. Transitional justice, as it stands now, has at least 6 components that are applicable complementarily. The first of those is prosecution. There will be an element of people that will be tried through a court process. There will be an element of reconciliation, widespread processes of reconciliation. There will be a process of amnesties. There will be a process of compensation. There will be a process of institutional reform. And all these components, if applicable in a comprehensive, systematic, complementary manner, it has been proven that they are effective in bringing about transitions in countries. So they'll address the issue of justice, and I think the state of the art now is there will not be peace without justice. So these two things are important. There must be redress to victims, and this redress might take a form of individual compensation, but also there is a collective compensation element. So for example, in the policy options paper, you'd also see why a country like Ethiopia might benefit from an effective process of transitional justice, which should give you, like I said, these comprehensive elements to address your past and move to the future.
Yeah, of course, you mentioned like victims will be compensated, and there are lots of things you are going to undertake through this process. But what kind of goals shall we expect at the end of the process?
Well, currently we are at a stage of policy development, and it's unorthodox really in an Ethiopian context to have a policy options paper. People use the term green paper, but what green paper means is options for policy making. So it's not only on, like you said, on victims redress. It's also on prosecution, it's also on amnesty, it's also on reconciliation, it's also on truth seeking. One important element of transitional justice processes is the documentation of truths. What happened, where, who was the victim, who was attacked. So there will be a long process of transitional justice. So I think there is a need to separate the two. We are now at a stage of policy development, which sort of lays down options for how to go about an actual transitional justice process. And there will be a thorough consultation with a wide range of stakeholders, and at the end of that there will be an adaptation of policy. Then there might be also some laws that need to be passed in order to implement that policy, and then there will be an actual process of transitional justice. So some of the things, the goals, the objectives will be defined in the actual policy. But for now, the policy, the objective of this process, the objective of consultation on the green paper is to collect inputs. Like I said, transitional justice is a process that has been tried in many different contexts, so we have to adopt it to our own context. The transitional justice processes are effective if they are nationally led, domestically driven. So we have to bring out what a lot of stakeholders feel about these different options. So the goal of this process is getting inputs on the transitional justice options. But the goal of the transitional justice process itself will be justice, will be satisfying, the need for victims redress, reconciliation, truth seeking, and then it will thoroughly be defined by the process itself. So I think it must be clear that the process we're now undertaking is a preparatory process of a policy, which leads to a kickstart of an actual transitional justice policy being informed by these consultations.
Right. As you have known, we were in a war situation before the peace deal agreement was signed between the Ethiopian federal government and the TPLF forces. As you have known, again, the peace and the security situation in Ethiopia is fragile here and there. So what I want to know is how far or how long the transitional justice will curb problems in Ethiopia.
Well, transitional justice, as you can see from the term, is transitional. It can't be a permanent process. Countries who have passed through it have done it for a limited period of time. Some of the most effective transitional justice processes went on for 3 years, 4 years. Then the assumption is there will be sufficient institutional building that the regular law enforcement will take on issues of justice, and widespread and systematic violation of human rights will decrease. So in a context like Ethiopia, for example, where you have multiple conflict hotspots, and like I said, multiple victims, multiple perpetrators, it's very difficult to go through a regular justice platform to address all this. One, the system will be overwhelmed. It's a lot of victims, it's a lot of perpetrators. Two, there is a lot of underlying political issues behind this human rights violation. And a process like transitional justice would also give you an opportunity to dialogue, an opportunity for truth seeking, an opportunity for reconciliation. So it does not only have a very linear victims must be redressed, perpetrators must be punished kind of approach. It also has sort of a community level approach where reconciliation and peace building is its element. So the assumption is it's very fitting to our context, not only in a context of the Tigray conflict, but also in a lot of other conflicts that have happened in Ethiopia for the past years. One of the questions the policy papers asks is, if we're going to launch a transitional justice process, where should it start? So it could go far back as there are like 5 or 6 options that are given the time the constitution was promulgated, or even before that. there are a lot of cutoff points that are up for discussion, which will be firmed up based on the consultations that we're going to have in the next 3-4 months. But the idea is, in a context like ours, transitional justice has multifaceted benefits, and we have to launch it. But ideally, once we went through this process, the understanding is the transitional justice process would at least provide justice, will provide accountability, will provide truths to major human rights violations that have happened in this country. But afterwards, the last component of a transitional justice approach is institutional building. Ultimately, you'd want every violation to be accounted for. You'd want every single victim to be redressed. So we are not going to go through every 10 years another transitional justice process. The idea is to have a comprehensive transitional justice process to reconcile with the past, and then have an institution or institutional frameworks that would address future challenges. So it's not something that you do it every 5, every 10 years. It's something that at a crossroad like our country, it's very beneficial. It has been proven beneficial in many different contexts, but then it will lead into an institutionalized accountability, an institutionalized form of justice. So it's a precursor for that.
Right. That's great. So who are actors who are taking part in the transitional justice process? You're going to tell me as well the procedures you are following, but do you think all opposition political parties, civil societies, international communities, or other stakeholders can get the access or chance to take part in the transitional justice process? Can you please give us a brief?
I mean, one of the things I think that's interesting in this policy development is it has become very participatory. International practice also tells you that the process of establishing a transitional justice approach is as important as the outcome itself. So I think we're in a good place in those terms. The working group is composed of independent experts that have sort of undertaken a long study on the experiences of other countries, what the approach should be, and this green paper is a result of that analysis of approaches elsewhere. So the green paper itself, like I said, presents policy options, and this is, for me, there are always going to be inputs on policies, right? But this is a bit more than that, and I really want to use this opportunity to call for the stakeholders you mentioned, political parties, civil society, academia, international actors, to input on what they think is appropriate for the Ethiopian context. I think, for me, this is arguably the first opportunity that the government has given to make a policy based on consultations. So the next step is there will be a series of consultations, including with the actors you mentioned, but not only in Addis, in the different regions in Ethiopia, to collect inputs on how to go about these options from victims, from government actors, from opposition political party actors, from civil society. And then the idea is to recommend to government, based on this consultation, a transitional justice policy must look like this. And hopefully it's going to be a government policy. Government adopts it, and then, like I said, hopefully we kickstart a transitional justice process, which in itself has a lifespan of its own. It's a difficult process, but it's a process that's worthwhile, especially in a country like ours. So the process so far has been this. The working group under the Ministry of Justice has developed this green paper. The green paper has been publicized. We have started already getting some inputs from different stakeholders, but there will be different forums, platforms, workshop-like platforms where actors can give inputs, but also there are when we announced the green paper, there are also addresses where people can submit written comments to these options. So hopefully there will be a widespread consultation, and hopefully we get the inputs and everybody participates. And again, this is, I want to reiterate what I said earlier about the call for every stakeholder to take this opportunity seriously. Transitional justice is a very serious undertaking. It's a very important undertaking. I believe we shouldn't fail again on this. If we make it work, I think it will solve a lot of problems in our country. So every stakeholder, opposition parties, I urge them to use the opportunity to get their inputs, but also to send their inputs in writing, to challenge us, to argue with the options, to say this doesn't work, this would work. And then, we have to seize this opportunity that this policy-making process is genuinely consultative. And in order to make sure that happens, then we need an active participation of the stakeholders you mentioned.
Right. To what extent the public at large is informed about the green paper, the concept?
Well, this is part of that. I believe there will be a lot of media engagements. Hopefully, the consultation rounds are too many. We're going to, at least tentatively, there will be around 56, 57 platforms where people can express their views. And in a lot of these platforms, we want to also sensitize the population, the general public, on what transitional justice is, what to expect from it. But it's also partly the work of media actors, the work of civil society, the work of other stakeholders to say, this is coming, this is what it is. We need to actively, position ourselves to be able to, seize the opportunity, maximize the benefits. So, yes, you're right. There is a need to sensitize. There is a need to create awareness. But I believe that work should not be limited to the working group. The working group has, like I said, plans to do that. But media actors, civil society, opposition politicians, and other stakeholders need also to magnify, create awareness so that people can have a meaningful participation.
Right. Now, you're exerting maximum efforts so to bring about a sustainable peace in the country. I think that is your final objective. So what's expected from the side of the government, from the opposition political parties, from the international communities? Any message you'd like to deliver? This is my final question.
Yeah, like I said, the stage we're in is a stage where we have options. It's not a predetermined option. If you pick one from the components that I mentioned, prosecution, and read the document will ask who should be prosecuted. Should we go for the main perpetrators or every foot soldier, or should we prosecute grave human rights violations or every crime? There are different options. There are also institutional options. So none of these options are predetermined. The idea is through these consultations, we'll try to narrow down the options, and then every option is presented with pros and cons. So in every option, you'll see strengths and weaknesses. So at this stage, my key message is to take an active part in the consultations. We can't have a consultation for a year, as you can imagine. Transitional justice consultations cannot be, they say they cannot be a marathon, they can't also be a 100-meter race. So there will be sufficient consultations for people to air their views. But my main message here is the stage we're in is a stage where inputs are collected. So everybody should contribute. People with views, they should first read the document, try to understand it, and then if they have inputs, whether or not this option is better than the other, or there are things that we haven't looked, we have overlooked, things that people might think should be included in the policy-making process, they are welcome. So the key message from me is to use this opportunity for broader Ethiopians, but also for organized groups such as civil society, academia, political parties, to air their views, to use the opportunity to input. And then hopefully we can come up with a transitional justice policy that's workable, that's acceptable, that's effective, and then it can serve its purpose. The key thing you said about the objective contributing to peace, transitional justice says it contributes to peace, but it also contributes to justice. And I think that's the key component that we've been missing in this country. And justice can be achieved formally, and transitional justice provides you an opportunity that you can achieve justice also in addition to prosecution through truth seeking, through reconciliation, through other components that indirectly or directly will contribute to sustainable peace. So my main call, my main ask is for people to use this opportunity, read the document, provide inputs, participate in the consultation forums, challenge, agree, disagree, but then air the concern. So like I said, the process is as important as the outcome.
Yeah, probably our audience might ask, like, where did they can find the document? In how many languages it's written? Is it available online?
It's available online. It has been publicized in the Ministry of Justice official social media platforms. We can also reshare it every now and then. Currently, it's available in Amharic and English, but there will be many different consultations where people can air their comments in many different languages. We are at the start of the process, so there will be, we expect in the next 3 or 4 months, there will be a lot of consultation forums, a lot of inputs that will come in our way. So the idea is to aggregate those comments and input into the final decisions on the option. So people can find it in the official pages of Ministry of Justice.
Exactly, Misganaw. As you have said, the topic and the issue by itself needs a series of consultations, so that probably we might meet some other time and discuss another topics for our audience. But for now, I would like to say thank you very much for coming here at studio for an exclusive interview, for your brief description about transitional justice.
It has been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, viewers, this concludes the program I have organized in connection with the Transitional Justice. I met Misganaw Mulugeta. He is a member of a Transitional Justice Working Group. We have raised very critical topics related with the topic we have raised. This concludes my program for today. Until I come yet with another topic and next time, have a nice time. I am Misganaw Mulugeta. Thank you.